Okay.
We're live.
Good day. Yes, Marta's just going to play a good morning video on the webinars, right, Marta?
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Lily and I'm the director of QUBE Events. I would like to welcome you all to the financial technology,
Marta, it looks like we're losing Lily. Do you want to come in?
Yeah. Am I back?
Yes, sure.
I should start with how aligning everybody's technologies seems to be a I'm so sorry for this interruption. I think it's just the connection. In any case, welcome to the third webinar, Financial Technology Strategy Ahead. We have an amazing lineup of speakers and presenters here with us today. I see we've got great support. Thank you all so much for being here with us and sharing the experience. A few notes from my side before we start. Marta, if you can please put up our supporters slide. I'd like to thank all our supporters for promoting the event. We really have got an incredible lineup of supporters from CBIT, ITK to ContentWorks to Selk, to Smas, to Issaka. Thank you all for your support. We greatly appreciate that. I will be talking a little bit about them in our coffee break a little bit later on today. I also would like to thank all our speakers, of course, for taking the time. I know it's so difficult to coordinate schedules. Most of us are kind of floating between home and home workspace and actual workspace at this stage. So it is a real coordinated effort to have you all here today. So thank you so much for that. And we look forward to your shared insights. And thank you once more. To our audience, I please ask you to take advantage of this platform and please do share your comments in the chats. Any questions you may have, please do put them forward for our panel of experts. This really is an opportunity to exchange views, exchange knowledge, and really use the next 3 hours to get better insights and more insights into what's going on in the current state of financial technology. So I'd also like to thank the QUBE team, without a doubt. Marta, thank you so much for amazing work you've done on the content. Vahidra, Luca, everybody in the sides there that have helped us to get this platform up and running. Now to our chairman, both are conference veterans of QUBE Events, as well as now Robert, you are a veteran for our webinar platform. I would like to say a quick note about our forward schedule. With borders opening up, we're tentatively looking at our third quarter schedule, and we hope to bring you to our beautiful island in Cyprus for what should be an amazing event. Again, decisions about our actual conference calendar will be held. Safety is secured. Robert, I feel I needed no introduction, but I will do the introductions. Robert Courtnage, a payment expert, one of the top 10 payment influencers that is out there right now. Thank you so much. Peter, a founder and mentor of FinTech Ireland. Peter is recognized by Chambers and Partners as a Band 1 leading fintech consultant. Peter, thank you so much. It's your first webinar with us, but definitely not your first exchange with QUBE. So thank you for being here. I will hand over to you. I will see you in the coffee break and at the end of the webinar. Thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate your support. QUBE is so excited to offer you this platform, and I hope you enjoy your event. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily, very much. And thank you, Peter, for joining me. This is the first webinar you're doing with the QUBE team, but as Lily says, you've done many, many events, and you and I have co-chaired quite a few live ones, and I'm sure there'll be some more to come once this is all over. We are living in very unusual times at the moment, but the good news is, certainly in the UK, a lot of the restrictions are starting to be eased a bit, and I think in Ireland that's happening as well, is it not, Peter?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, but like all these crises, they never impact everybody equally, and I guess the recovery coming out of it is never equal either. But that's just the way things are. Ireland is very slowly coming back to normal, though. Unless you're an essential service, you're not back in the office. So financial services are considered an essential service, but it does mean that still, I think, nearly close to 95% of all staff are working remotely. But what I was going to ask you, Robert, was, you know, we've seen some amazing things in the fintech industry. We've seen business models that have been completely interrupted. We've seen new business models coming out of COVID in e-com and payments. We've seen existing models pivot. We've seen stock market fluctuations for the prices of listed fintech and banks. And we've even seen amazing fluctuations in private valuations as well. So it looks like COVID doesn't discriminate when it comes to its impact on financial services and fintech.
No, I mean, I think the most interesting differentiator between this and the previous financial crisis is that the previous one was seen to have been brought about by the banks doing the wrong thing, and it was a massive boost for the fintechs and the challenger banks. Whereas there seems to be almost a reversal in this event, because it's the banks that are sort of backing up the whole system, working with the central banks, ensuring monies are going out to key industries and helping people that need funds in these times. And we've seen a rallying around of the established banks, and we have seen a hit on some of the new challenger banks that have been coming through. So that to me has been one of the main differentiators between this and the previous financial crisis, that the established banks have really got strength through this.
Yeah, I mean, I heard JP Morgan say the other day that apparently 17 trillion has been pumped into the economy by the central banks. And what was also great to see is some of those fintech companies now getting on the list of undistribution for some of these government support schemes. Last crisis, but they are now. So that's another great advancement for financial technology.
And I'm very much looking forward to our panels and our fireside chat today that we've got with some very interesting speakers that have got some examples to give us of what's been going on in their territories, in their environments. And I think the great thing about these events is the ability to pull personal experiences from a lot of these industry experts around the world to see how they've been working in this environment.
Spot on, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that as I do this, that we are on Twitter, so I will be posting on Twitter when I get a chance. And just to remind everybody that's tuned in, the hashtag for Twitter is NPF 2020. NPF 2020 is the hashtag.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. So I think we're getting over our time now, so I'm going to try and keep everything on time all the way through, as I'm sure you will be for your sessions. And I will ask the first panelists on board, but look forward to catching up with you in the break to have a chat about what's been going on in this first session. It'd be good to get your insight, Peter.
Yep, I'll just hear from stage. Thank you, Robert. Good luck, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks for the panel.
So, Marta, Lily, if you could get the first four panelists up on stage, We have Pedro de Souza Avelino, who's from NN Insurance, who I can see is there. He was on a panel last time with me. Great guy. Ritesh Jan, I can see is joined us. Kostas, hi Kostas, good to see you. And are we waiting for? No, we've got Bharat. We were just waiting for. Sorry, Bharat, I missed you down there. Yeah, Bharat's there. So everyone is on board. If we can just do the normal, just kick off. I mean, the topic, as you all know, on this one is about game changers, new technologies for a new crisis. What are the key response measures and mitigation strategies implemented? What is next? Is there an acceleration of some innovative technologies, and what's going on with things like AI and blockchain? We've got a nice mix here from insurance through tech and through obviously payments. So perhaps if Pedro, you could just kick off, just give a brief intro, then Amit, then if we could have, then Ritesh, then Kostas, then Bharat, please.
Gladly. Hello, Robert. Hey, Penno. Hello, everyone. Nice being here again. So, from the insurance perspective, coming from a National Netherlands, a Dutch insurer with a pan-European presence in the market of insurance, specifically majority life insurance. And you can imagine how life insurance can be boring and can be very cumbersome from the heavy back office processes that we have. So if you're talking about new challenges and new disruption in the technology paradigm that we had, specifically on the insurance context after coronavirus and COVID, is that opportunities that arise from it is, imagine that back office process, specifically from a lot of paperwork, and having a possibility of identifying forms that is very form-based. I'm based in Hungary, in Budapest. And with this, we have a lot of forms going back and forth from regulatory perspective. So we need to have those forms that the customers have to, or they can access the company services through channels that are very outdated. And with this is how you can identify and scan them and apply some sort of AI on top of it to, for example, try to rescue a customer. What we have is surrender forms. So surrender forms are very common to say, I don't want to pay my insurance anymore. I don't have any means to do it. And we have to filter out and sort it out among there's so many, a multitude of digital channels and the regular channels, outdated channels that we have, to rescue a customer, to give it to an agent and to say, hey, agents, we need to rescue them. And if you do this manually, if you did this through sorting and literally going through, instead of finding a pattern, identifying the form, finding this and going through it to already bump it and already identify who is the customer, who is the agent of that customer, and send it directly. This is a case that we managed to do it. So rescuing a customer that already tried to get it from the surrender part and to go it for the agent, so the agent could talk to them, say, we can relieve a premium for you, we can do something. It's an opportunity and a catalyst, and we should definitely use it.
Fantastic, Pedro. Thank you for the insurance perspective. Perhaps if we could go across now to Ritesh. Do you want to introduce yourself, a little bit about your company, and then have your first thoughts on this matter?
Sure. Thanks, Robert. Pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Ritesh, and with about 2 decades of experience in digital and with different industries, not only limited to the banking and financial services or payments. So I've been active in the payment market of fintech. Specifically, I will not keep long for myself, but let's talk about what's really happening in the industry. So we have seen a significant change in the recent past, specifically in 8 to 10 weeks, which we haven't seen in the last couple of years. It's basically the change in the mindset, the psychological change. And as Robert has said earlier crises were related to financial crisis, and this crisis has impacted the human being. That is a significant difference in the previous pandemics as well, because the previous pandemics were quite regional, and this one is global. So what has changed into the financial services and fintech? As everybody is talking about the acceleration of digitization, yes, we are seeing that and experiencing it. And these are the times to to look into this as a threat and opportunity. And that's what I'm experiencing from various sectors, especially in the financial services. So just to give you some examples of what happened. As soon as we have been hit by pandemic, the first thing happened is our contactless limit has gone up overnight, which we as a financial services companies and organizations have been buying for a couple of years. And it took just a matter of a couple of days. At the same time, some of the companies or the financial services like HSBC, we have come up with a trade finance services in partnership with Alibaba by utilizing their data to enable a trade finance up to $500,000 for merchants without any collateral. And that could have been possible because we have just democratized and utilized the data already available for those merchants. Similarly, as of yesterday, another application have been introduced for equity investors, because these markets where we have seen one side, the retail investments or the retail market is going down, but the wealth investments have increased. And similarly, we have seen the similar patterns into the fintechs. So in last 8 to 10 weeks, we have seen a significant surge in terms of the investment. As we have said about the valuations as well, we have seen a tremendous growth in some of the valuations. I will not talk about the valuations of the challenger or any of the fintechs over here, but in general, we have seen a significant growth. So these are the times where the fintechs or the financial services need to take this as an opportunity for the next leap, because that's what we have experienced after 2008. We have seen a new unicorns, a significant number of unicorns, and that's what precisely, and even more so, I would be expecting in the next couple of years, the new unicorns coming out of this pandemic. So, especially when we look into the financial services, now the focus more so, at the moment, the focus is on underbanked. But during this pandemic, we have seen one more thing which is coming out, is how we are going to serve the unbanked customers. How we are going to fill the disparity that we have. For an example, in UK market, for the disparity in the lending from credit card to personal loans to payday loans, which varies from 2.53% to 1,500%. How we are going to serve our customer better. And that's a great opportunity.
Thank you. I think each of the sectors of our industry are key to creating a new starting point, I think, post this pandemic, and I think it will bring out a lot of things like this, as you've just discussed. Kostas, perhaps we can have an intro from you and your initial thoughts from your technology background on this.
Much for the introduction. I'm Kostas. I used to be the director of machine learning in OAK North Bank and like OAK North AI. For now, I'm sitting in Greece waiting for the pandemic to settle down a bit and see what the next steps will be. So yeah, I mean, from my point of view, and actually have been spending quite a lot of time both in the UK and Greece the last couple of years, I can tell you there is obviously tectonic shift in many industries, some to some extent affected by geography. I'll come to that in a bit. So we see industries like logistics, telecommunications, collaboration tools to essentially thriving at the moment because there's a massive need of normality, like things to carry on forward, even in a pandemic situation. Whereas in other industries like tourism, transportation, commuting, services of that kind of stuff are massively affected. And that also, bear in mind that SMEs are heavily affected by the situation, like smaller companies. which essentially is caused by the disruption of the typical behavior of customers, which is totally accepted, but also happened in a very, very short period of time. And here comes where machine learning essentially enters the scene. And we need also to take into account the aspect of geography, like different geographies, and how different countries or geographies have better capacity or lower capacity to deal with outbreaks and the pandemic. And all these factors are essentially composing a very challenging and potentially, of course, difficult, but also a very interesting situation of where things to move next. So there's a massive need for tools at the moment. Most of the tools are already there, right? So when we're talking about like technologies revolving machine learning, artificial intelligence, it's not that much that we don't have the tools. It's that we change completely our behavior as customers, and our models need to adapt to the new reality. So that means that changing the behavior, there is a massive demand shifted to different essential industries, and that affects payments, that affects a lot of like tools and tooling that we need to exist in order to keep all customers happy and carry on forward. But like I said, all the technologies is there. For example, even in like tourism or like commuting, all these industries that have been affected, they already have technology for optimization, forecasting, and so on and so forth. And that technology is gradually shifting to logistics for better prediction, better forecasting, better optimization, and so on and so forth. There is also a huge opportunity at the moment growing up in the medtech scene, or in terms of machine learning and AI. And we're talking about drug discovery, diagnosis, pretty much all the technologies that we have growing all these years now that have been accelerated in a crazy factor because it's a crisis. So we need to pay closer attention to that scene. I think it's going to be one of the very promising things in the next couple of years. And again, from like my point of view, I can actually see that different geographies have been affected in various degrees. Some countries have been able to essentially go very, very smoothly for the first wave, like Greece, for example. We're now opening borders to tourism, hotels, and so on and so forth. We will see how things will be with aviation and everything. That essentially start kicking in South Europe. However, in the UK, things are a little bit not that good at the moment, and US is just another story. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there's too much uncertainty at the moment. We're expecting a second wave in pandemic, a second outbreak, and quite a lot of the future will essentially depend and just by the capacity of each country to handle an outbreak. Some countries, some geographies like in Greece, cannot really afford a second lockdown for 2 months. We're talking about at least 50% recession for 2020, based on the data we have here. And I think it's going to be devastating if we go into a second lockdown somewhere September, October. Hopefully it won't get to that. People are realizing what the stakes are, and also are behaving in a very different and challenging way. But as long as we have some knowledge how to essentially as communities, like as people, to deal with this very weird singularity in the situation, things will be smoother now. It was a shock, quite a shock for pretty much every industry, every country, every person that I know of. And we're getting there.
Very much, Kostas. And interesting how we're saying things are accelerating, the technology is accelerating going forward. And that's not just in the financial services sector. I mean, I think as I think we've talked to before, a lot of the drug testing and the ability to do vaccines has accelerated, and clearly we don't want any of that slowing down once the virus is controlled. We want to be able to be prepared for a second wave or another virus coming in future. So looking at things on a pure tech basis, we've got Bharat from IBM here. Bharat, maybe a few more views on things like AI and predictive machine learning in this environment, and how that's going to help us going forward with this acceleration.
Thank you, Robert. So lots of interesting views from fellow panelists. Everyone's kind of made some really interesting points. Now the work that we're doing and the observations that I'm making from a point of view of financial services industry, there are two types of transformations happening here. One is kind of the inside out transformation. So as a result of the pandemic, the acceleration of adopting digital technologies that has definitely happened, where organizations are looking to either enhance their target operating model to be operationally more efficient, in other ways, reduce their cost to income ratios by implementing technology for straight through processing. So think about how financial institutions are now doing onboarding. Perhaps they're using AI and analytics in some of those onboarding activities, but also some of the mid and back office functions as well. Take financial crime as an example, a hotspot for applying AI, but clearly not for the obvious reasons. But there are lots of changes in the culture within the bank. And I say not the things that are obvious today are being able to work from home, et cetera, and that for several financial institutions was a departure from normality, because for certain job functions, there's desks and fixed desktops where people work from. But I think going forward, we're also seeing, so I talked about the transformation from inside out, but outside in as well. So you look at the adoption of digitized services from consumers. Those clients that perhaps did not use mobile banking or internet banking, perhaps preferred to walk into a branch, are now, for obvious reasons, again, choosing to use internet banking. The several banks around the world are seeing a huge increase in the number of applications they're receiving for either delaying their mortgage payments or perhaps application for those loans that the government is issuing through these banks as well. So there's a capacity issue that banks need to be able to manage all of those hundreds of thousands of applications. I mean, Pedro, you talked about insurance being boring. The world wouldn't be the same without insurance. So in the US, we're nearly 1 million applications a day being submitted, right? So across the board, whether it's a healthcare system, to retail institutions, to banking and financial markets, there's an element of stress in terms of reaching maximum capacity that the infrastructure could reach. So I'm seeing a real acceleration in the adoption of cloud. Now, cloud previously, 5 years ago, was being talked about in terms of cost, but now it's about innovation, forming new business models, creating those platforms and ecosystems. And particularly from a banking point of view, open banking has accelerated some of the banking as a service type discussions, which large financial institutions are actively working on. So couldn't agree more with the panelists that the current pandemic has definitely accelerated the adoption of digital technologies within the bank, but from outside of the bank as well, purely down to consumer demand.
And would you also say that this thing we were talking about, this acceleration? I mean, one thing we always find in a time of crisis is certain industries accelerate ahead of the curve because of what's going on. And so some of the things in relation to financial services that I think are coming through are things to do with how you get payments to people quickly in a time of crisis. We saw the crazy situation in the US where they were getting checks printed and sent out to people, and it was, even once they got them, it was taking them ages. A lot of them didn't have bank accounts. They had to go to cash checkers, and it was a horrible solution. And we hear about things like, it's called helicopter cash, where you have to get money to people in remote places who may not have bank accounts.
Yeah.
How would you say you see that playing out, Barrett? Have you seen any innovations there that are accelerating?
Absolutely. I think the value of technology is to ultimately help people live their lives better. And financial institutions are no different. I think they certainly have a role to play to serve the unbanked and the underbanked, that the point that Ritesh made earlier on. And to consider those edge cases of people living in remote communities. Access to cash has been a big topic of discussion for the regulator here in the UK. So absolutely, I think technology does have a role to play, and to make it easier to consume. I think several of our clients have implemented chatbots for the self-service reasons. So rather than having to wait for 2 hours, 3 hours, or an hour, 45 minutes, or however long it is, to get to a point where you're speaking with someone who is so brand new into the role and they don't have access to system and you're having to wait again, why not use self-service channels to carry out those actions? So I think there's an element of building out that consumer confidence and establishing that trust, and that would come through transparency, because we're collecting a lot of data, and what we're sharing as consumers, we're sharing a lot of data, and banks are collecting a lot of data. So I think there will come a point where we will ask the questions of, how is this data being used? How is it helping me as a consumer live my life better, help me save more money, and prepare for the unknown future?
Ritesh, are you seeing similar things in your sector? In as I say, I mean, your background is very much in the banking sector. Are you seeing some of these technologies accelerating to help get funding out to businesses and to individuals that need it? You're on mute, by the way.
Hi, thanks, Robert, for letting me know. Otherwise, I would have been speaking to myself. So yes, we have seen a surge into the funding to the businesses to support them, especially small to medium businesses, and the big businesses have been taken care of by the governments as well, as we have seen quite a lot in the news. So yes, we have seen there's a significant support from the financial services, and what we are seeing, even quite a lot of awareness from the local people. They are supporting local businesses a lot more than what they have done in past. So the human factor, definitely, which we have seen, the humanity, the side of people, significantly during this pandemic, and I hope and pray that will continue in post-COVID as well. Now, specifically, what you mentioned earlier about the payments and the basic services. Now we are seeing a lot more focus on the basic services, which is related to the payments, remittances, transactions, right? Because in certain markets, especially in Asia, some of the banks have seen, especially I would say HSBC has seen 94% uplift in their contactless market. So we are going to see a revolution and further advancement in the contactless. So I'll take you back to 2015 when we have introduced Apple Pay, or the tokenization first time. The whole idea behind the tokenization is basically for the contactless payments, making it faster, cheaper, and more secure sort of payment. But the contactless payments are limited with their limits. Now, what we are going to see in the future is the speed and the innovation into the cross-border payments. So all the PSPs, the payment service providers, and the financial services are working on how we can make it faster and cheaper. Because if we look into the Visa Direct as of today, you get remittances cross-border in 30 minutes. So the whole forces are behind how we can make contactless cheaper for the merchants and so for the people, as well as how we can make it faster to reach money anywhere in the world. And now more so on the unbanked people, how we can make it accessible for the unbanked people. The financial inclusion has come into focus a lot more than it was before COVID-19.
But when we were chatting, you specifically talked about how HSBC had looked at helping some of their smaller businesses doing a deal with Alipay. How did that work, and how did that come out of this crisis?
So that's what precisely I mentioned earlier in the statement. It's because these are my views, not representing any bank over here. So not only HSBC, but all the banks, they have come forward and they have utilized the technology, specifically the AI and machine learning. And as I said, like, we are living in the time of the democratization of the data and services. How we can utilize the data and the services which are already available. And that's what happened in the trade finance sector as well. So to expedite the services, what financial services like HSBC has done, they have consumed the already available data for merchants from different providers and utilizing that data to provide a trade finance up to $500,000 without any collateral. Otherwise, it used to be a tedious process for a couple of weeks to months to provide a trade finance. Now, so as we have seen, the COVID-19 has definitely expedited the transformation. And as Bharata said rightly, it worked both ways, internally and externally. So inward to outwards and outwards to inward. So we are seeing that transformation, and I believe it is going to continue.
Thank you. Talking about the sort of use of data, perhaps if I could go to Kostas and talk about some of the data uses that's coming out of this COVID crisis. I mean, we've got all the things going on track and trace. We've got the ability to find people that need funding and things like that. And we've got this whole conflict, I think, between, we see it across the world, civil liberties against safety of the citizens. How are you seeing that playing out?
That's a very, very good question, actually. Like I said before, the whole pandemic crisis essentially shifted completely our behaviors. So most of enough models from the models we had in the past are no longer valid in the sense that our behaviors changed completely. So we need to start collecting new data to adapt to the new reality and build predictive models that can actually reflect what's happening and be accurate as well. That's one thing. I've heard some people a few weeks back say, yeah, all the data are useless. No, they're not useless. We just didn't have data to capture this unprecedented times. So we now have some data now, and our models are adjusting depending on how flexible the models were. This world is not static by any means. At the same time, there's essentially a fine line, I guess, or a compromise between our private data and safety out there. So it might be the case that, and actually it's already happening in the sense that I actually was reading an article yesterday that I think it was Singapore. People are handed over with like their mobile application. They can go for a walk for an hour, and the application tracks all their the path. Here in Greece, things were a little bit different. We're not that good in technology. We're just sending SMSs and so on. So there's already massive support from technology to protect people and to keep them aware of what's happening around them. On the other hand, people are worrying about giving too many data, right, to get monitored and so on and so forth. And whereas it's my point of view, and I'm speaking for myself now, it's a very good thing to be able to control or essentially being aware of what's happening around us with the use of technology. That's necessary at this point in time. It doesn't really mean that as long as we're after the pandemic, things will need to go like that. So that worries a lot of people. There's like a fine trade-off between safety and surveillance, right? For now, it's good because it's crisis. We need to save lives. 2 years later, I don't think there's going to be any. And also bear in mind that even several people, like super smart, very well established people, have already given warnings in the past, like Bill Gates and other people. Were not ready to deal with this situation. Now we are, and now we can actually build much better tools without compromising like civil rights or any kind of like in this direction, and essentially getting very strong in surveillance. Of course, machine learning is very strong on that. Several countries are already doing that with face recognition, temperature readings, and so on and so forth. It's very good, but it also has a very short window of time.
Costas. And finally, before I go round up and just get your views, each of you, on what one thing do you think will continue post-pandemic, that what one change? I'll just go back to Pedro, if that's all right, and just on the data side and the pandemic side, on the coming through on the insurance thing specifically. What changes are you seeing that you think are going to be long-term changes to the way in which your insurance? We talked about paper, I know, coming out of this, and you pointed out that I think the insurance industry is so far behind and still so much paper. Do you think that will bring a good result out of this pandemic?
Thank you for the question, Robert. Bharat mentioned something that I really related to, specifically on the mid and back end processes that you have. And a no-regret move was the flexibilization of specifically how regulators towards insurance helped our KYC processes. So KYC, specifically in the Central European countries, we have a very heavy type that you have an agent, as Ritesh mentioned as well. You have your intermediary as an agent, a tied agent to tie to your brand that goes to your customer, and you have a physical process of literally going through the paperwork, doing a KYC manual, taking pictures of what they have as documents, do the proof of the customer and identification. And this has to be done, or had to be done, presentially. What it meant is that you have agents traveling around the country to reach the people on country and outskirts of the country as well, to have this physical process. Whereas if this continued, and if this was something that was a halt in life insurance in the context of the market, what happened is, luckily, would have premiums being paid, but then new revenue would be halted. So literally it would be a flat line, and it would be just like nothing coming in the pipe. Where we have at least the sustainability of the company, but your bottom line growing up, your top line not growing, you know what happens, yeah? So with this, answering the question that is very important and very crucial for us is how the change between the paradigm of having physical agents as a financial advisor towards your customers to sell products physically, to do this digitally, and to do this in anticipating your processes with AI, with forms and surrender, with machine learning of identifying predictive models, to literally do this remotely with anticipated needs of your customer and to be there when they need it. So to really support the customer throughout their lifetime journey, that will be part of the financial advisor, because it's still needed. So look, in very hard, we have life insurance being done and sold automatically through direct channels. We have Lemonade and we have success cases, but in other accounts, they are very risk averse, and in terms of adoption, it's very hard. So you need a person to hold your hand and to get you there, to get to understand complex products. And with this, changing the paradigm of a face-to-face towards a digital know your customer KYC process and a digital presence of the financial advisor towards your customer is something that is a no-regrettable move, and something that we will endure after the pandemic, indeed.
Thank you very much, Pedro. That was a brilliant explanation, and I think it will do wonders for the insurance industry. I'm going to go back through reverse now and start with Bharat. Perhaps you could come on and just give me your...
Just trying to come off mute. Robert, I think again, there are obvious things that would carry on. So on the chat, there's a question about contactless payments. Absolutely, these things, anything that minimizes contact or close proximity with other colleagues, friends, family. I think for at least for a few years, we can see that impact would carry on until we have a reliable and safe vaccine. Now, purely from a tech point of view, I think the role of digital technologies, and I use that term collectively for things like analytics, use of data, storing data, running advanced analytics on data, use of cloud, and be able to, APIs, for example, that provide that kind of gateway and window into new products and services. That would continue, and banks will have to change their business model because interest rates are pretty much zero in most countries, and if not negative. And so they'd have to look at new ways of forming those revenues, and we would see changes in operating model. The bank of today will not be the same bank 3-4 years from today. So that we will see new ways of banking, and perhaps the number of banks that we know and love will become invisible to us because they will be powering so many. Just care about payments. We just care about that convenience factor. But whilst all of this is happening, I think the industry does need to do a little bit more work around safety of using AI. And what I mean by that is it's very easy to jump on the bandwagon of using AI, but if your systems are not tested properly, let's take the simplest example of using a chatbot. If your chatbot is not able to understand and answer questions in a safe manner, we know that then when people have done experiments in the past, chatbots can become abusive, particularly if they are self-learning, using self-learning algorithms. To then on the far right, where you're automating the engine, the heart of the bank. And when you're doing complex processing like that, it's very easy to just look at the mainstream use cases, but not the edge use cases. But as other panelists have also pointed out, this is a time when edge cases will become mainstream, in addition to what's already been mainstream. So I think there will be a lot more focus on, I hope, is moral and ethics of AI and not just blind adoption of AI.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time now, so I'd just like to thank very much our 4 panelists here. I think we got a great overview of some of the things that are going to accelerate and come through. Thank you very much, Kostas. That was brilliant. Thank you very much, Ritesh. Thank you, Pedro, and thank you, Bharat. I thought we were some really clear. There are some questions that are in the question section. Perhaps if you 4 guys could have a look at those and maybe send some answers and start typing them, that would be really helpful as well. But thank you all very much for your contribution. Really appreciate it. And now, Marta, if you perhaps could bring on Angela for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you all. And just a small change, if we can please run now the panel on IT security, because Angela is stuck on the meeting, so we will just exchange the timing of this session. All right. I see all of the panelists are there, so Pedro, Kostas, if you can stay there, and Peter and the other panelists, I will just bring in. So we'll just make a small twist. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go off now. While in that case, Peter, are you coming on? Or okay, I'm just going to talk generally while we wait for everyone. I guess Marta's behind the scenes. It sounds like Angela had something come up, so she's going to come off. Peter, you've got to jump forward and do your session now on perspectives of data security and regulation. So can I hand over to you, and I'll drop off.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that, Robert, and well done, panel members. And I'll be seeing a few of you guys on another later this morning. So hopefully by the magic of technology and being agile, we can jump ahead now into this session. And so looks like I've got the crew together. This is the, we're going to be jumping, I think, if I look at this, are we jumping into the data security regulations, or are we jumping into the IT risk one? It looks like it's the IT risk one. Is that correct, gents?
Yes.
Lovely. Okay, so let me just catch up my notes. I've got them all out of order here. And so thanks very much. So this is our panel session. And welcome very much on Q&A here for Stay Safe, Information Technology, Security Risks. And what we're going to be talking about here is some of the headaches in IT, some of the most common system recovery issues, how we might fix them, and what's lying ahead, plus a lot more. So I'm very happy to be joined, and I will, as I announce you by name, I'll then come back to you. If you've already introduced yourself on another panel, and I know you have Costas there and Pedro, you might just do a shorter introduction, but Vishal Shah, you're very welcome to join us. Also, Costas, saw you in the last panel. Sergio, feels like we're old friends now, the number of video calls we've done the last few days. And also thanks, Pedro. So Vishal, I'll start with you, if I may, if you just like to just introduce yourself and just a couple of points that you might want to unpack during the course of the presentation. Don't jump into those points, just do the introduction, name the points, and then we'll come straight back and then we'll go to Pedro, Costas, and then Sergio. So over to you, Vish.
Thank you very much, Peter. Appreciate it. And thanks, co-panelists as well. I think some of us, we already had a session to understand the details around here. So myself, Vishal Shah, I've been working with TSYS, have a experience in banking industry and digital innovations, data modeling arena. So that's my primary niche, managing data centers and managing production services worldwide for TSYS Global Payments. What I would like to cover, and for the audience on the call here, is basically a view of what IT security is in simple terms. That's one of the priority things which I would like to mention. The benefits what fintech and financial institutions would have given to us, those are definitely very important features which we are all using it. But alongside, what type of challenges does it bring us, and what are the IT risks which it is putting forward, and how are we going to mitigate them, is what the areas I would be discussing on this session along with my co-panelist Peter.
And I'm just turn over now to Sergio, because we haven't, my mistake, so I'm going to jump to Sergio here because we haven't been introduced to you yet. And let me take you off mute.
My name is Sergio Magalhães. I'm responsible for the IT channel development in Millennium BCP in Portugal, that has another subsidiaries in Poland, also in Angola, Mozambique, and so on. So what my role now is after passing by the Digital Transformation Office, and now I'm more related with the development of channels and on the digital. So we are going to talk more about this type of what we are calling now and we are all adopting this type of simply don't trust security model. And this simply don't trust is something that all the banks were aware some years ago, but now more effectively with the COVID-19. So I think it will be a discussion about this. And because now we are throwing away the idea that we should have this type of trusted internal network and the other untrusted external network. And now the banks don't have anymore this type of trusted and untrusted network. And we have to be aware since the very beginning of this simply don't trust security model.
Okay, thanks for that, Serge. And I just let me just take control here. Right, Costas, back over to you. What are the 2 points you just like to raise briefly, then we'll jump into those.
Bear in mind, speaking for IT security and machine learning, that even if the last 4 or 5 years there's been like exponential growth and adoption in machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques when it comes to essentially training models on data, there are a few things that are very, very important and definitely not resolved yet. And half of that is because of the fact that we're still improving models. And the other one is completely new techniques and adopted in businesses. So we need to think a little bit ahead in terms of IT and security. So I'll give a couple of like really important examples of essentially attacking models, right? And also the IP side of things, of people essentially attacking models but to steal models. And there is also a various range of not machine learning problems, IT risks exposed us in machine learning, AI, like per se on its own. but rather where machine learning can also be used to enrich or facilitate our efforts to detect fraud, intrusion, and so on and so forth. That's the things that mostly concerned with IT security from my own point of view.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Pedro, over to you, sir.
Hey, Peter. Good one. Is the saying of the last 2 months, right? I'm sorry, I was on mute.
No problem at all. I seem to have the control to take you off mute, but maybe I was unmuting you or you were unmuting yourself.
No worries.
Yeah, so listen, thanks for the email you sent through ahead of today's call, today's webinar. Just maybe what are the 2 points, just in very brief summary, you'd like to get across today?
Sure.
And then maybe a bit of a teaser, and then I'm going to jump into some questions for all of you.
Please. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. I think that one important point in how to maintain consistency is from staying ahead of the curve, as Costas mentioned about machine learning and how this attack surface could increase, is that how regulatory compliance could play a role in your operating model of you trying to play catch up and trying to stay ahead of the curve in newest or newer agile operating models and scaled operating models throughout your organization. For example, DevSecOps, that although it can be sounding as challenging as DevSecBizOps as well, as challenging as it is, but it's the one way that it can help you and enable you to be ahead of the curve. So how to get this across, how to materialize this inside your organization, instead of playing catch up, be ahead of it. And with this, how to reduce the surface and attack surface on your edge as well, with your manage and control devices throughout deploying BYOD broadly, with the point of having all your employees accessing internet with your data, with computers and managed devices from the companies in their own homes without being aware or being sure that they are protecting themselves. So those are very two important parts.
Okay, thanks for that. And so what I was going to say is that one of the things we want to talk about is some of the IT headaches, and I think we also probably need to leave the audience with some hopefully some positive thoughts as well. So very quickly, all those in financial services in at least Europe and most of the rest of the world, when we were jumping out of our offices, we were told to work remotely. Financial services was exempted as an exclusion to that in many countries. However, we were still putting 95% of our staff at home working remotely. What does remote working represent in terms of IT risks? And do you think that we had thought about this as part of our risk register? Did we think about IT risks sufficiently? Short answers here, because then I want to feed that into some of the takeaways. So, look, I might just start there firstly with you, Michelle, if you'd like.
Just like to give a brief note from IT security point of view. In simple terms, what I would say is IT security, and I think the users here would agree to that, is that it's a joint ability of infrastructure and application to withstand any malicious and protect the user data. So that's a simple definition. How do we achieve that? With what kind of degree of changes and ecosystem of infrastructure? How do we achieve that is one of the biggest challenge. And with growing innovations and growing number of changes in the infrastructure of the banks and the fintechs, this has been one of the biggest challenge I think all of us are facing, and we will always be behind in terms of security, because the cyber hackers are always ahead and attempting to do something more than types of defects into the system. They try to misuse the application in whatever ways they can find. In terms of mitigating the risk, Peter, the point which organizations currently are trying to implement are one of the strongest thing is making sure that their network attack has enough defenses placed in anti-phishing kind of features which would stop and prevent and block such kind of threats. There are a few features which I think all of the infrastructure should be implementing is two-factor authentications, synchronizing of certain type of servers so that the time protocol between two servers are always intact. This is so important in avoiding all types of fraud from infrastructure point of view. And there are many more which I think some of the colleagues also on the panel would try to identify. But adding to that, one of the things is encryption, which is very, very important in times of people working from home. And the use of AI to see the data usage patterns. This has been highly utilized these days to identify potential risks. The AI learns itself. And I think in the previous panel, somebody indicated that how AI can also be misused because it's auto-learning. But still, AI happens to be one of the important events in the current situations to identify data usage patterns. And based on the risks which are being identified, right actions can be taken to avoid any malicious attack onto the infrastructure and the systems.
Okay, now listen, thanks for that. And I don't know whether maybe subsequent to today, you could have a chat with Lily, and maybe that excellent summary you gave me ahead of today might be able to be shared in your name if you so wish, because you've really helped a lot of definitional terms there. And I think a lot of folk out there reviewing their IT security policies, I think you've given them a lovely starting point in enhancing those things. Pedro, if I may turn to you. Talk to me about DevOps in this environment, and then also very briefly around the regulatory compliance challenges. The idea of cloud adoption obviously has picked up a lot faster in this current environment.
Sure. So very interesting question, very on point, because Peter.
I hope so. You gave them to me.
Sure.
I hope they're good questions because you gave them to me.
Yeah, I know. Indeed. Yeah. I give you the cake on the platter already.
Thank you, Pedro.
So,
far away.
But because even how do you look at it? Is being an insurer, we manage risk. Yeah, we use this as a science from an actuarial perspective, where you try to measure, assess, and mathematically calculate risk that you're exposing yourself to. And we do this also from the technology perspective. So we try to adopt frameworks from ISF, or International Security Standards Forum, to get this in place, and to how we score against the maturity level to be sure that we're raising the bar towards our own internal security systems, and how our applications fare against a certain framework. So if you try to do this again from a manual perspective, where you're trying to always catch the tail and circle around and trying to catch it, it's very hard to achieve it. So when you embed your IT general controls, some of the frameworks that you mentioned as well, when you share the SRM, and if I think about it, how to implement this from an automation perspective, is that maintaining your chain, your development cycles as well, from development to test, to acceptance, to production, and how you do this from security at the core, not only having source code control, versioning systems, code quality scan, security code scan, and all of those are the ones that you try to embed in your delivery processes, if the technology allows so, because there are some areas where you cannot, when your mainframes are very hard to embed this, is how to bring it across, how to compare against a security framework that you put it for yourself, and to apply those processes of your general controls from test of design and the test of effectiveness of those controls. And those are the things that will allow you to constantly assess. And if you don't monitor, it doesn't exist. If you don't measure, it doesn't exist. Measure it along the way, always have the metrics across, and to purple team yourself, penetration test yourself along the way. And all of those are processes that you have to continuously do to metric yourself and always score how you're faring against a certain baseline that you put it for yourself.
No, thank you for that. And I'm going to quickly jump to Serge here as well. If I just put you there, and Serge, I'll take you off mute. Serge, in relation to your bank, a bit like I know with the Pedro's from NN, but it is owned by a bank. You have both the traditional bank model, and then you're also building, or you're looking at digital transformation, or a different also fintech model. But you must be looking at IT. Do you look at IT risks in the same manner across those two broad spectrums? Or do you think about them slightly differently? And the reason I wanted to ask you that question is because I guess you answer to a higher God, you answer to the European Central Bank, and you answer to the European Bank Authority, just as Pedro answers to IOPA, and others answer to other regular ESAs. So they've published lots of guidelines around IT risks. Just curious about how you implement these things in your role, please.
Yes, yes, is the same that Pedro was talking about. We need to maintain a platform because we starting this adoption of mobile and clouds, and we no longer have a network perimeter centric view of security. So even for everything must be secured. So instead, we need security and enable all the access for all the users, even if employees, partners, contractors, and regardless of their location, device, or network. So there is no silver bullet, even with a model of IT risks, to achieving what we call the simply don't trust security architecture. But this is very important to have this IT risk model in place. And identity and access management are the core technology, and this is very important for the IT risk. So this cybersecurity that we are calling now for this new open era and looking at this platform of IT risks, we have to have this risk-based approach defined, perfectly defined, and in place. This anti-fraud platform operational, and according what Pedro was saying, testing in the beginning, testing in the conception, and testing at the end on the delivery. This continuous compliance in place, so everything must be compliant with all the rules, with IT risk framework and models, and all these new defense tools are deployed and operational. So we have this new security operation center, and it's very important for banks to have this security operations center to be in place and not be dependent of any part of the organization. It must be a security operational center dependent of the board. Why? Because they must be aware that they must be controlling everything that happens on the organization. This type of zero trust is too serious to be treated like an IT department or so on. No, must be a security operations center, and this is very important to have this model and this IT risk model. So for us, what we do is for each of the goals that we have in digital experience reinvented, for open banking, for robotization, for data-driven banking, for journey to cloud, and agile and DevOps. For each of these category, we must have a cybersecurity response and IT risk model for each part of the.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, you raise a really good number of points there. I sit on the board, I think, of 4 or 5 regulated companies now. In Ireland, we have to have IT risks on the agenda of all the MiFID companies. So if we don't put it on the agenda, and the regulator sometimes gets the board minutes, then you're sort of exposing yourself. But the other thing we're looking at, particularly here in Ireland, is making the Chief Information Officer a regulated position in itself. So look, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's with the board C-suite. I was going to ask you, Kostas, is there, in terms, and maybe you had some more time to reflect on this, you know, we're talking about traditional IT risk, but we're now working in an environment, COVID, remote working, and for many of us, I'm not saying everyone on this panel, but for many of us and people I work with, we did not anticipate having a remote working environment. It's not a business continuity issue. So are there any things that we didn't think about going into a remote working environment when it comes to IT risk, either an IT risk we knew but we didn't fully appreciate it, or even a potential new IT risk, such as staff downloading their own applications away from company protocol?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, fine. Someone lost connection.
Serge just lost. We'll get him back, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's having discussions with my compliance like director and so on and so forth. You can't really lower your guard at any point in time. So, and because things are essentially now distributed and everyone is working remotely, that potentially grows the appetite on attackers and like malicious attempts to be even stronger, right? And it's, I guess, sometimes, especially when the entire team is not in the same physical place, it can take some time to organize a response and so on and so forth. So the best way to deal with the unknown is to stay alert. And I think that's obvious, right? And going back a little bit to my initial kind of approach on the machine learning and AI, and where it comes to risk, there are two different major factors there. So the first one is the risk attached to machine learning as technology, because still we're improving it as pretty much every technology. And there are several risks, like I told you. For example, adversarial attacks. You have a face recognition system, you wear a stupid t-shirt with some like random noise patches and destroy completely your face recognition system. That's one thing. It's data contamination. The chatbot scenario mentioned in the previous panel. If your chatbot essentially is open in the wild or learns in an online fashion, it can be very, very easily exposed to malicious attacks. And that can actually be a very, very bad situation for your business.
Okay.
Right? And of course, like adversarial attacks to steal models and so on and so forth. If you have a model that does prediction, some can actually just start hitting the model with random inputs, trying to get back a better understanding, reverse engineering essentially your model.
Okay. And I think we're going to, thanks for that, Kostas. I think we have to end it there. We are going to do a cybersecurity panel this morning as well, or this afternoon, depending where you are. And we might have a look at a bit more detail. So listen, I want to say thanks. Apologies, we just lost Serge towards the end. I had one more question. I'll just make it general, but I'm looking for an answer on it. But I guess the other thing is that we have to start thinking about the IT risks we're going to incur as we move staff back into the office. So thanks very much, Vish. Thanks, Serge. Thanks, Pedro. Thanks, Kostas. Great. I'm going to hand back to Marta because I think we're going to be looking for a virtual coffee break. Thank you.
Very much, Peter. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Vishal. Thank you, Kostas.
Well, I'm just waiting for the others to join, but Marty, if you can hear me, maybe jump in, and whether we're heading into a break now or we're jumping into a new session.
Yes, Robert will join you shortly, and let us make then 8 minutes break, so we'll be 5 minutes over the time. The rest should stay the same. We'll be running some polls in a second, so take a coffee and enjoy the short break, and we'll see each other again like 10 to 12.
Okay, we'll see everyone in 10 to 12 minutes.
Hi,
Hey,
Rob.
Lily.
Hi.
Sorry, I had a bit of a connection issue.
Cool. I just thought I would jump on the stage and just talk a little bit about the polls that Marta's putting up. We obviously want to get people to be a little bit engaged and share their views with us. So Marta's going ahead with a few questions, which I think are really interesting, and we're very curious, obviously, to hear people's views on these matters and see which direction that points us in. So, but it gives me a chance to thank both of you for the first two sessions. Thank you so much for that. I do think, yes, Angela got caught up, I believe, on some sort of a conference call, but we will fit her session in as soon as she's available right after our break. So things as per usual. Thank you so much.
So, what do you think, Lily, in terms of the schedule now? And sorry, Lily, in terms of the schedule now and the order after the break, are we guaranteed to go to Angela, or are we going to jump to another session instead?
I think we should go to instead of Angela. I believe, unless Marta can confirm otherwise.
Yes, and if like everything stays the same, just shift between those two sessions. So Angela is going into IT security risks. The rest is the same as it was.
Okay, so Angela's going in on the 12:05 session.
Yes.
The next one will be the data security and regulations one. So it's now 11:47. We will go back at what time? Are we thinking it's about
3 minutes? 3 minutes we're starting.
3 minutes.
Okay, so we're going back at 11:50. And this one's 20 minutes. Yeah? Or do you need it shorter?
What are you thinking of these results, Peter? Have you seen the polls on the right there? There seems to be a thought that AM and ML will grow faster. That's where they think it's happening, and I think that's true, because I think all the tech, not just in banking but in creating solutions, finding virus vaccines and things like that, AI and ML is being used across many different streams now, isn't it? Many verticals.
Yeah, well, I guess you see AI and ML is that sort of fertilizer, really, isn't it? Right, on what we're doing. So it's going to make that explosion happen. Industry starting to collaborate. They're all commercial people. As soon as they see an opportunity to make money, they'll collaborate, right? But that's not a tool in the toolkit. So yeah, AI, ML, and people continue to forget about natural processing, natural language processing, which is still a really big part of getting us to AI and ML. So I agree on that poll. Yep, absolutely.
And on the other one, I'm a bit surprised. Major banks are going to be a bit upset that it's just fintechs they think are going to continue to drive financial innovation, which I know you'd expect. But at one stage, the regulators were at a higher level of innovation than major banks in that poll, which surprised me. I still think the major banks are driving a lot of innovation in the real space.
Well, I think it's a tough question, because you're only able to answer one or the other, right? So the major banks like Serge's Bank has got its traditional bank, and it's building out its sort of digital platform as well. So where do you lump him? Do you put him in fintech, or do you put him in bank? So yeah, I guess you're getting that. I'd imagine the smaller American banks and the savings and loans in the US, that's where the big struggle is going to be for those institutions. But with the major banks, I mean, look, they're spending 11% of their budget on IT, at least, part of which goes into innovation, and they've got a separate innovation budget.
Yeah, no, I can see that continuing. Anyway, I'm gonna pull out and let you get your panel together. You've got like 1 minute, so I will have a chat with you after Angela. So we're gonna, just so everyone knows, we're gonna do the data security and regulations session with Peter now, and then I'm gonna have my fireside chat with Angela from Lloyds Bank, which is off her call. So Peter, over to you.
Thanks very much, Robert. Guys, you're welcome. I don't know if Marta can hear me, but there was a slide, Marta, that we were going to put up for this particular panel. So if you can find that, we will jump into that slide at one point. You're all very welcome. Thanks very much for everybody for joining us back here after the break. I think we've gone back on live now. Yes, we are on stage, and we're going to be discussing new perspectives on data security and regulations. Now, this is a very broad topic, and this panel worked pretty hard leading up to the panel session because we knew that we could end up going down rabbit holes. We had a great discussion then just on IT risk, which would be obviously a subset of what's going on in cybersecurity. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to introduce each person by name. And then I'm going to come back to each of you to ask you just to say something about yourselves, and then I'll just do just one point you would like to address in our panel session. And we are finishing this session at actually just at probably 12:05 thereabouts. It's 11:50 CET, so we'll go to about 12:05. So first of all, I'm going to turn to Ridish. And Ridish, you're very welcome. I know you had a brief introduction. You had an introduction in the last session, so I might skip the introduction about who you are, but maybe about what's one of the points you'd like to get unpacked during the course of today.
So during the course of today, sorry, I missed that last part, Peter. You want me to focus?
Just one of the points you'd like to raise during this session, and then we'll come back to that.
So it's mainly about the increment into the number of transactions that we are seeing and the digital acceleration and how that will play out the data security and the cyber security in the world of banking and finance, but overall the sector, right? So how regulators are going to support in terms of streamlining the regulatory requirement and how financial services are going to respond to that. Especially what we have seen over the period of time in the financial services, the biggest challenge is about the regulatory requirement, whether it's for the data or the cybersecurity. And that takes up to say 30% of the large program times. So yes, there is a significant innovation on that side, whether we talk about the KYC, AML, or any other hashtags which are coming into play to streamline the regulatory requirement by the financial services. But at the same time, we would like to see active involvement from the regulators as well to help out with the streamlining of these regulatories. Sorry, Peter, we have lost you.
Oh, you've lost me.
Now it's much better.
I'm back. Okay. Maybe I'm running on the old copper wire still here in Ireland. Anyway, I'm going to turn to Ellie. Ellie, over to you. Just an introduction who you are and what you're doing, and particularly one point you'd like to get across during our session.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the invitation and for QUBE. You know, it's always a pleasure to be back here and to participate to your events, guys. So today, you know, since we're discussing, I think, the regulatory challenges, security, and so on, I would like to focus maybe on strong customer authentication and the link with e-commerce and how important this is, you know, given the crisis we are going through, and especially looking ahead, as is the theme of this webinar, and maybe also with a specific angle on contactless payments.
That sounds great. Thank you for that, Ellie. And I'm just going to turn over now to Denise. And Denise, would you like to take you off mute and over to you for a brief introduction of who you are? You're at the Czech Republic Central Bank, and particularly thanks for the email ahead of ahead of today. But maybe mention one of those points that you'd like to discuss during our panel session.
Firstly, I would like to say that it was very interesting just to listen to the seminar and to previous speakers. And I have absolutely agreed that just during this time is very important to secure data. And for example, you have mentioned I come from the Czech Republic, and if I could watch the last situation during the pandemic, I was wondered how many, for example, cyber attacks were on Czech hospitals during this pandemic. pandemic. So it was something what we felt it was really crucial, and it was unfair. So from my point of view, it's really very important just to support cyber security knowledges, and just to support the knowledges of the public. Yes, absolutely.
No, thank you for that. And I don't know whether I can enlarge that screen, which just has a framework for EU security. If I click on it, I'm not sure that actually expands it, but can you guys see that screen okay, that one image? And just for the audience, look, it's not a work of art or anything like that. Just in discussing the EU cybersecurity framework with the panel on Friday, I just thought I'd rip together, and it's at a high level, and I'm sure I've missed something. But the EU cybersecurity framework is driven by these things in the middle: the data set, the digital single market strategy, the EU cybersecurity strategy. There's a new EU, there's an EU fintech action plan, but there's also a consultation on the digital finance strategy and fintech, which you need to do that consultation before the middle of June, I think it is. So please, if you're a big fan of this area, do that consultation for the European Commission, because we're going to learn a lot out of it. And then on the outside, the arrows, they're all pointing at the various underlying requirements that come out of those plans and those strategies, whether it's the NIS directive, the General Data Protection Regulation, the joint advice of the European supervisory agencies, the EIADS regulation on identity, payment services 2, the EBA guidelines, and then, of course, we have a Cybersecurity Act in Europe that not many may necessarily know about. And on top of that, we have, just like what Denise says, we have central banks and financial regulators, which may then add to these requirements in their local jurisdiction. And of course, we have that rubbing up against the Data Protection Commissioner's additional requirements over and above what would be in the General Data Protection Regulation in member states. And the one that's in light blue, and it's in light blue because it's not really an EU requirement, but it's the PCI DSS standards, I think, that are important to mention. So just thought we would give that as the framework for when we talk about cybersecurity, but we don't need to see that that slide anymore, Marte. So feel free, if you don't wish to show it, you can take that down. I might just start there with you, Denise, if I may. First of all, look, let's talk about COVID and the changing behaviours of clients. And there's another point that someone else also wants to touch on in our presentation. So maybe, what's been going on in terms of just the growth, and we need to be quick on these questions and answers, but the growth in growing e-commerce and, also prepaid non-cash payments. Are you seeing a lot of growth in that at your level and at the European level? Hi, Denise. Did you hear that question?
Yes, maybe. Thanks for this great question. Yes, you have mentioned, definitely, COVID time just changed our life. And I can also see changing in Czech clients' consumer behavior. So it was very interesting, and I wondered just to watch the domestic statistics of bank payments. So for last few months, the Czech card issuer statistics show rapidly growing of spending money in e-shops. So it means growing of e-commerce definitely, and as well as non-cash payment transaction via payment card, especially using contactless technology as NFC, for example. And if I ask why, so it was very simple answer, because people were and still are very afraid just to use banknotes and coins, because they can be a transmitter of the virus. So also Czech shops prefer till now just to pay a non-cash. So to summarize for me, or from my point of view, it means I was so wondered how traditional Czech customer can change in a few weeks, because we are very traditional just to shop normally in classical shops and to pay cash. and now we change our habits definitely.
Yeah.
So it's something what I could, and I would like to share my experience, and it's interesting just to know how it was in your countries.
Great. I'm going to come straight back to that. I just wanted to mention, thank you for saying the growth of e-commerce. I mean, obviously, lots of stats are out there about where it's going to go by 2023, but it's just going in one direction, and that is up. I thought was very interesting last year was that by the end of December last year, the amount of electronic money in issue across the European Union increased by 44%. In the 12 months to the end of 2019. So there is another indicator about the massive growth. But what does this growth actually mean then in terms of cybersecurity risks and challenges? And there, I'd like to ask that question to you, Ellie, because we were talking about card growth and as well card payments. But what does this actually mean in an organisation like yours in trying to understand the cybersecurity risks? People are going more online to shop. We're using contactless. What's the Amex view on this? Or your own personal view?
Thank you. This is an excellent question because, as you rightly mentioned, what we've seen during the COVID crisis is that there has been, an increase of online spend for obvious reasons. And this is something that I would say put a huge risks, on companies like ours. So at Amex, for us, we always, we believe like we need to go in parallel, like with having convenience for consumers, for our card members, but also at the same time, convenience goes hand in hand with security. So in order for these transactions, to go through and to grow, we need to make sure like consumers are confident and they are using it. And it's super important. Like when, it's obvious that when you have more and more transactions happening, the risks are increasing and the cybersecurity risks are increasing in parallel. So we keep, I would say, investing in this area, but it is very important, to note here, I think, the fraud rates, because this is also an important aspect. Plus, the cybersecurity, I think the fraud aspect is very important. And I could share with you that in terms of contactless, we've mentioned it maybe quickly, but the limits have been increased, right, to the maximum allowed right now, which is 550 euros. And I can tell you that this has been really very successful. Consumers, our consumers, but also I could say across the industry, have been very satisfied. And at least, from our company, I can share with you that the fraud rates didn't increase. They stayed, at the same level, which is already very low when we talk about contactless. So I would say, yes, there are, additional risks that we need, to prepare for as companies. But the good news is that there is no shift in terms of major changes in terms of fraud and cybersecurity, at least for the time being.
That's very interesting to hear that there hasn't actually been an increase in the amount of fraud. But I guess also a lot of us have been given some breathing space. If we haven't, although there is a legal requirement around SCA, looks like we've got some supervisory or enforcement leeway here. I want to jump over here. I just want to jump over to Reddish, and then I want to jump back into Denise in the last couple of minutes that we have. So Reddish, in relation to these points around cybersecurity, is there anything else you'd like to add to what Ellie and Denise have said at the moment, Reddish?
Most of the points, especially Ellie has mentioned about the not increment into the frauds. That's a bit soul satisfying for the financial services and fintechs at this point of time. Especially when we think about the transactions, or when we think about the money, the first thing comes in the mind is about the security. And that's why the customer trust the big market players with their large chunk of money. Because it's easy to deal with a customer who are for day-to-day transactions. But when you think about a large chunk, it's significant risk. And now when we think about the cybersecurity, another thing is the fraudsters are running an organization, right? And they are a step ahead than even with the major cybersecurity teams. So we need to think about cybersecurity and data is not only for in the time of COVID, but it's always been the prime focus into the financial services of fintech, and not only limited to financial services, but to every other sector as well. Because in recent past, what we have seen are major breaches in the hospitality sector, in the medical. So the data is prime, and how we can provide that confidence to our customer that their data is secure. So what is going to change from here onwards? That we have seen the major difference between the challengers and the incumbents is about the legacy, and how incumbents are going to turn that legacy into a transformative infrastructure and platforms and services to make it more secure. I do not want to get over here into the conversation of whether mainframe is more secure than the cloud. Yes, possibly, and we can discuss about that as well. But the focus here is on how we are going to, even if we are talking about the fraud rates haven't gone up, but there are, how we are going to make it more efficient, these processes. So the focus after the COVID that we are going to see is, again, a significant investment. We are talking about digital transformation as an overall, but the view is significant investment onto the cloud and cybersecurity.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that. Because what I was to say, Reddish, I want to jump over to Denise here. And just, Denise, in listening to that, the first thing I actually thought of, actually, back to you, Reddish, was the experience credit rating data breach, which was just phenomenal, right? But Denise, in relation to your own communications with the regulated market and the regulated fintechs, what's happened in relation to that? The communication channels still open between yourself and those you regulate, and are you requiring any more reporting over and above that you would normally require? And are the regulated firms able to meet your additional data information requests? Oh, sorry. You're good to go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So there are two questions. So firstly, just how we communicate now with our applicants, if I and summarize, and the second is reporting. So, you know, definitely it's, thank you for this question, because firstly, I can see that, yes, it's very difficult time for everybody now, but we have to continue. And we have to stay definitely in contact with our applicants. And so I feel that it was very also useful for Czech National Bank, because I feel we are now more flexible just in communication. Just we have, everybody of us has to know to use new communication instruments. My children also, just to communicate with the school. Yeah. But definitely, so we start to communicate with our applicants more flexible, and we are still on teleconference. We use new technology. Because, you know, COVID time, it's difficult, but we have here, on the other hand, administrative process, which is very strict and formal, and there are still legal terms which runs, and it's not possible just to stop because of pandemic, unfortunately. So yes, sure, we stay in contact. And normally we use, as I said one more time, the teleconference. And on the other hand, we have special, for example, fintech, if it was mentioned. So we have special contact point, just to communicate with fintech to its special email address only just for these companies for their questions. And so I really fear we have learned and just to communicate and to be prepared mostly, because this is maybe not only for first time, but it will be maybe next time. So I feel it's better just to be prepared, and according to the and it was on the national level, and I see also that on the EU level, you have already mentioned, Peter, the public consultation of the European Commission. and it was one of digital finance strategy, and the second is on retail payments. It's quite interesting just to monitor public consultation, but in parallel to these two public consultation, the French Competition Authority has just launched a public consultation on the fintech strategy. And fintech sector for QSync, in particular on payment services. So you can see that really also our French colleagues are very active, and for me it will be very interesting just to monitor these results.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, of course, cybersecurity is a big thing for the central banks as well, even for their own access, people trying to break into their systems and controls. Very quickly, Ellie, just I'm going to ask you a quick answer, yes or no. Amex on track for its SCA requirements? It sounds like everything I read that it is. No additional challenges?
Yes, we are on track. The biggest challenge, you know, when it comes to the SCA implementation is mainly merge.
Okay. Well, just lost you there. Okay, look, in fact, I apologise for this, Richard. I'm going to try and have a chat with you a bit later. Have a look at the questions, folk, in the Q&As and see if you can answer them. I believe Angela's now available, and Rob needs to jump into the Q&A session with Angela. So, if everybody, I mean, virtual collab. Thanks very much, Reddish. Thanks very much, Ellie, and thanks very much, Denise. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from each of you today and on other occasions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Over to you, Mr. Courtney.
I'm on here now, and hopefully Angela has joined me very shortly so that we can go on to the fireside chat on resilient strategic planning. And who would have thought that we'd have had to have a chat about this? This is certainly an area where there have been a lot of issues, I would imagine, because how many people have properly planned for a pandemic?
Yeah.
So. Angela, how are you? Good morning.
I'm good. Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Angela, I can hear you perfectly. You and I had a few chats about this ahead of time. Maybe if you could just introduce yourself, say what your role
is. And I'm responsible for risk across technology change and new technology at Lloyds Banking Group. Prior to being at Deutsche Bank, Ernst & Young and IBM.
We're in a pandemic. How many of the major banks like Lloyds do you think would have had good plans in place and have been rolling them out during this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that from a regulatory standpoint, most of the banks, if not all of the banks, have had to do scenario planning with respect to potential scenarios such as the COVID pandemic. I think that the scenario planning they would have done definitely would have covered, you know, the financial impacts of such a pandemic. I think the question is, you know, how deep did that scenario planning go? So did it cover the operational risks associated with the pandemic? Did it cover the risks associated with suppliers? Did it cover the risks associated with locations? Did it cover the risks associated with learning and the amount of change that all of the colleagues have to go through? So it would be interesting to look at those.
And specifically the whole, I mean, as we said, there's probably three main areas. There's the impact that it would have on customers. There's certainly the impact it would have on your staff, and then it was going to be the impact on the bottom line of the bank. How would you say, if we look first of all maybe at the staff, we haven't really looked at that much. How much of an effect has it had? Are staff able to work from home okay? Have there been proper solutions in place? And where do you think the good practices are and the bad practices in relation to strategic planning in this sector? I'm not sure. You're on mute, Angela.
Oh, how did I manage to put myself on mute? Oh, sorry, fine. I think there's a bit of a delay with the tech, but bear with us, I guess. So yeah, I think with the respect to colleagues, I think colleagues are some of the most impacted groups. I think if you look at it from two perspectives, I think there's some impacts. So the first one is looking at colleagues with respect to suppliers. So I know that some of the suppliers that were based in India didn't have laptops, so the suppliers themselves don't provide laptops for their colleagues. And when the COVID pandemic occurred, those laptops that were being used by the suppliers had to be repurposed back to the front office colleagues, and those suppliers were then unable to do their work because they didn't have a laptop at all. So I think that's definitely an impact. I think the other impact was again sort of in India. A lot of suppliers, potentially colleagues, were living in hostels, and when the pandemic hit, they had to leave the hostels and they had to go and work from home, where they may not have had a desk, may not have had much space, might have been in a pretty cramped environment, might not have had running water, electricity, broadband. So those impacts on the suppliers, and I don't think a lot of people necessarily modelled the impact on their suppliers and their offshore locations such as India. I think the other impact on colleagues, which I think we need to consider, is just the vast amount that everyone's had to learn through this COVID pandemic. So I think there's two routes through which everyone's been learning. The first one is, having to learn things from a work point of view. So having to learn, how to do WebEx if they didn't know how to do WebEx, how to do Teams if they didn't know how to do Teams, how to do whichever, web conferencing software was being used within the firm. And then often there's work socials as well, which are using less locked down tech such as Zoom and Google, potentially House Party and maybe even Google Hangouts. So sort of more tech for them to learn sort of outside of their day jobs as well. When they're speaking to their family and their friends, instead of speaking to them face to face, they've had to learn even more tech to do the web conferencing with them. And I think the vast amount of volume of things that folks have had to learn at pace through this pandemic has really had an impact. And I think folks are sort of getting to the point where I'm not learning any more tech. Like, you use one of the techs that I already know. I don't want to use a new one. So I think that's definitely happening as well.
There's a bit of fatigue setting in on some of this, just the amount of tech they've had to take on board. And when we were chatting, you were saying that there are two schools of thought on how you should deploy laptops to staff, and you had your own views on that. Do you want to just explain to the listeners?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm aware of two clear schools of managing laptops. There may be others, but the one route is, very controlled. The firm issues the laptops. The laptops have to be, procured through a certain source. They have to be built in a certain way. They have to be, delivered out to the colleague, and all of that logistics and management and tech administration needs to be managed centrally, which I personally think is probably not the best solution. I think more likely a better solution is if you have moved to bring your own device. And the reason I think having moved to bring your own device is a better solution is because when you suddenly find yourself short of devices, like everyone has found themselves short of devices through the COVID pandemic, you've got that option to procure hardware with the specs. And then provided the laptops or the tablets have got those minimal specs, you can put Citrix or something equivalent on there, and you can tunnel through to a desktop that's sitting somewhere in a data center, either in the cloud or on-prem. And I think that route is probably more suited to what's happened here with the pandemic, because it means you don't have to do so much work in getting the laptops out. You really can go to Curry's PC World and pick up a laptop and use that to access your work files and software.
And so do you think many banks have gone down that route, or do you think the majority have gone the other route because of the fact that they want the security? I mean, is there a reduction in security if you go down the bring your own laptop route?
Yeah, so I think, security at these times is a massive focus for everyone. I think everyone's kind of worried that there's a bunch of hackers who might have had day jobs who have been furloughed and now have a huge amount of time to come and hack our banks. I think there's definitely nervousness around that, and there's a lot of phishing going on, fake emails trying to get your details. So I think that's definitely a concern. I think with respect to distributed laptops, I think folks believe that if it's a totally locked down laptop, it's going to be less susceptible to being hacked than, for example, a personal laptop with a Citrix tunneling into a desktop on demand. I'd say with respect to banks, I think banks are doing both things. I think there's some banks that have totally moved to bring your own device, and I think there's some banks that are still very much centrally managing their PCs for their colleagues.
And so the natural progression here is what's going to happen next. So do you see any long-term changes now? Now people are getting used to this working from home. Do you think some of the banks specifically are going to look at different work routes for their staff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think just before the lockdown, a lot of teams are doing sort of red and B teams, meaning that teams are going in on alternate days, for example. I think to switch it up, I would probably have A days, B days, and switch it up days, which means that folks can see people outside of their, red and blue constraints. I would probably opt for that. But I think that, I don't know if that, well, Google, for example, and I think Twitter as well, have pretty much been told, all their colleagues, that they're going to be not working from home through till the end of 2020. So they've just accepted that they're not going to get folks back in the office until 2021. So I think that's fair enough. And I think that the departments that can operate from home effectively will continue to operate from home. I think department leaders, for example, the front office sales guys, folks that really need to be in, I think a lot of them are currently in the office. And I think, we'll continue to work in a sort of a socially distanced way with less folks on the floor and the like. I think the other differences that I think is going to come in and might stick is, if you think about when you walk through if you just went through an imaginary walkthrough of your office, you might see a Kanban board on a wall, you might see a calendar on a whiteboard, you might see some mind maps also on a whiteboard. So you think about all of those things we used to do with sticky notes, whiteboard texters, so whiteboard markers, even writing on the glass. I've seen that with Poscas. So all of that, I think, has had to move virtually. So it'll be interesting to see which of those things go back to post-it note and whiteboard as opposed to being on a virtual medium.
I can see that we had this discussion and you said you wanted to do a couple of polls. The polls have now been posted about what we've just talked about. And so perhaps if the people that have dialed into this webcam could have a look at those two polls, then hopefully we could get some feedback before the end of this session. So if you could like to submit your votes. But do you want to talk through those polls? I think one was about the how people are going to work going forward.
Absolutely. So there's two polls up there for you all. So one is around what changes do we think will stick, and the other one is around what do we think is going to happen to our work volumes. So I'll just talk about what changes we think will stick. So obviously everyone's been working from home. Do we think that there'll be more working from home? So I can tell you from a personal point of view, I have never previously worked from home. I didn't have a desk. I didn't have anything actually, except a laptop. So when COVID happened, I was working from a couch, which is obviously not very good for my my back. So I had to get a card table in as a desk, and I've got a chair and monitor and all the rest of it. And now I'm totally set up. So if, for example, my firm said, well, you're going to have to work from home to save desk space, every other day, I'm 100% set up. So that could happen. So is there or is there not going to be more working from home? Will there or will there not be more webcam usage? And I think that people are trying to embrace webcam conferences as much as possible, and I think that should definitely continue. As I mentioned, if you did a virtual walkthrough of your office and saw the Kanban boards and the mind maps and the org charts and the calendars, etc., will that continue to be digital? Have people set stuff up at home? I've definitely seen some folks set their own little whiteboards and sticky notes up at their home office, which I thought was interesting. And will it go back to the way that was? I think there's other processes, maybe less so in the banking sector, because I think a lot of the banking sector has already become digitized. But, if you ever had a sign-up sheet, which is obviously paper that people put their names against, that will have moved to virtual. So would it stay virtual, or would you push the sign-up sheet back into the office once everyone returns, would be the question. So I think that covers the sort of, what's going to stick, what's not going to stick.
And then the other question in relation to the hours?
Sure. So exactly. So with respect to the hours, I think hours is interesting. So I think there's many things going on with hours. So I know that some departments are working red hot. You know, so they've got other halves that have perhaps been furloughed, so the children can be managed by the other half, whilst the employee has the opportunity to work full time. There's no commute, so whatever time that person would have started work, instead of starting sort of an hour-long commute, instead of starting at 9, that person might be starting at 8. And because there's no hour-long commute at the end of the day, instead of finishing at 6, they may be finishing at 7. And then I think there's also a bit of a competition going on as to who can work the most hours. And it's sort of like 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. is not unusual. And I think with that style of working, the deadlines have become tighter than they've ever been. So I definitely think some departments, productivity's gone up and the deadlines are super tight. Some departments, the productivity has gone down. Well, not productivity's gone down, but the capacity's gone down. So some departments, some of the colleagues need to be managing children and teaching children, which they've never done before. And that is very time consuming. Just managing a child and then teaching a child. I mean, it's sort of like if somebody said to me, can you please babysit this, 5-year-old child whilst you're doing your work, I'd sort of look at them quizzically and say, no, I can't do babysitting and my own job. So I think some people are definitely tied up with child minding. And that has obviously impacted the capacity. So the capacity's gone down. So they might be operating at 80% capacity or 5% capacity. And then the scope needs to move out because you can't do the same amount of things with a smaller capacity. And then I think there's other things going on. I think some departments are being, very compassionate to their employees. So they're sort of asking the employees, focus on your family, focus on your mental health, focus on your own well-being, and make sure that you're okay. And then looking to move things out that they can move out. So, for example, moving out risk and audit points by a few months to give people space to breathe, so that they can focus on what's really important. So not everything is in such a great big hurry. So I think that's going on as well. So yeah, so there's some that working less hard, not less hard, but there's lower capacity, more space to breathe, and others where its productivity's gone way up and the milestones are much, much closer than they would have been previously.
So the results have come in, and it looks like more working hours, tighter deadlines is the leader on the first one, and more working from home, surprisingly, is the leader on the second one, with webcam meetings coming in a close second. Probably no surprises for you on those.
Well, it's interesting. So I heard that Jacinda, the Prime Minister for New Zealand, asked the Kiwis whether they wanted to work 4 days a week. So I know there's books around, 4-day week, whatever it is. I mean, with so many of our roles and processes being automated, does that give us more capacity to take time for ourselves? But then the corresponding argument against that is obviously that, as humans, we like to be busy and we'll just fill the space to keep ourselves busy. So even if there's more space given to us because we've automated more processes, we'll just fill it up with more busyness, which I think is something we've just got to watch for. But yeah, interesting to see that everyone generally thinks that we're all going to be working harder with tighter deadlines. That's, from my point of view, a bit of a disappointing vision.
Brilliant.
And I just think on that, I guess, with respect to the disappointing vision, I think the other big thing that we've got to do with COVID is it's all very well for everyone to start talking about how rubbish everything is, how disappointing COVID is, how I can't get my work done, I've got to look after my children, it's so hard, the deadlines are so tight, I'm working ridiculous hours, I've potentially had a haircut, and I don't mean an actual haircut, I mean a wage cut, I've potentially been furloughed, or I've been decreased down a few days, like it's negative. I think, it's really important to get some balance and talk about some of the positive things that are going on as well. So, for example, I'm not on a tube that's completely packed every day for probably almost 2 hours. I get to see my wife every lunch. I get to spend time at home. I've been able to exercise more. My diet's probably healthier. So I think there's a lot of positives to COVID that folks have got to remember, because if you just keep talking about the negatives, it's a downward spiral of negative discussion, and it's just not healthy for anyone's heads.
Yeah, no, I think there have been many positives, as we've been talking about in the other sessions, about the acceleration of technology into spaces and developments that have sped up as a result of COVID that will continue practice afterwards. And I think the working from home and the more ability to understand that homework isn't less work, it's very productive. I think people have learned a lot from that. So thank you very much, Angela. I think that was a really useful session and a session we haven't really covered before. And I look forward to having you on the panel again later this afternoon. Thank you very much. And